The next generation of inventors showcased some of their big ideas today at Walnut Creek Elementary. These fourth graders showed off their creativity, wrapping up their invention fair by displaying their projects. That included the No Tie 3000, which is a shoe that ties its own laces, and a new medical device with a feeding and breathing tube combined.
My invention helps people who have had seizures or are having seizures and heart attacks.
Very cool. As part of the unit, the students researched the stories of the many inventors who came before them and displayed hand-drawn portraits of them alongside their inventions.
I could listen to explanations for each and every one of those. Yeah, and the names. The No Tie 3000.
Love that one.
Coming up.